And so we are going to transition into our second portion of this day, really looking at the border. What's happening at the border? We hear many stories, we hear many perspectives, but what's truth? What's fact? What is happening at our southern border? And so we want to bring up Jerry McKinney, who is also a board-certified immigration law specialist. He's the founder of McKinney Immigration Law, and he's the president of the National American Immigration Lawyers Association, and he serves as an adjunct professor at Elon University, and he is a member of the North Carolina State Bar Specialization Committee, and so he has a wealth of knowledge concerning this. And so, Jeremy, please, if we could come up.
There we go. Hi, everyone. All right. Well, I do need to amend that excellent introduction with a lot of was's. I was the president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. I'm currently the immediate past president. I was an adjunct professor at Elon, and I was a member of the North Carolina State Bar's Specialization Committee. So I guess you could say I have one foot in the pasture at this point. But I want to start off by just explaining the lay of the land in our hemisphere. Okay, so we need to broaden our perspective from Greensboro or even the United States for a moment, and we just need to focus on this half of the planet. All right, and to start that, I want to start by talking about the other side of the planet. How many of you out here are either part of Greensboro's Montagnard community or have assisted encountered Montagnards in the past? Anyone? Right? Of course there are a lot of hands, because this is Greensboro, the home of the largest resettlement of Montagnards in the United States. And this stemmed from America's involvement in the Vietnam War. The Montagnard are an ethnic minority within Vietnam that worked very closely with Americans and were in a lot of danger after the fall of Saigon in 1975. And so they went through a refugee resettlement process that was a combination of the United Nations and governments from all over the world and nonprofits like Lutheran Family Services that resulted in this huge resettlement in our area. And I will say we've been blessed by them for over 3 decades now. I recently was able to help several individuals through a program called United for Ukraine. Okay, so there's a process, obviously, after Russia's invasion, quickly organizations from all over the world jumped into action, including the United States, including this Congress and this president, which of course we all say is so divided, and of course that is a reality, but there are moments where we come around certain issues, and Ukraine has been one of those issues. And what did that mean? That means that tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been able to resettle in the United States over the last couple of years. Through that program, through active litigation, through active policies. I think about Afghanistan. I got a text last night from Judge Couch that was mentioned earlier, because Judge Couch has been deeply, deeply involved on trying to relocate and help Afghan interpreters who worked with the United States military during the Afghanistan war to relocate to the United States. And there was a family whose application has been going on for 10 years. 10 years, and has finally, he sent me a screenshot last night of their visas. And his question, because he's no longer an immigration judge, and this isn't in no whatever about that period of time, he's never been a practicing immigration attorney. So his question to me was, okay, so what now? I'm like, book a flight. They got a visa. My point in all that is that also providing support for Afghanistan. Look, we've had budget wars and budget battles and partisan fights over Afghanistan, over Ukraine, but at the end of the day, you saw people from both political parties come together to help a population. So, with that mindset, I want to turn to our hemisphere. I want to start with Venezuela. More than 7.7 million people have fled Venezuela. Now, let's put that in context. That is over 25% of the entire population of that country. 25% of that population have fled. Now, why? Because they had a huge economic collapse. It was an oil country. They have authoritarian rule. They have had complete governmental collapse. And so what you've seen is also a huge brain drain. Practically every Venezuelan client that we encounter at McKinney Immigration Law used to be a teacher, used to be a professor, used to be a doctor, used to be a lawyer. And now what are they doing? They're an Uber driver. Right? Because they're an Uber driver in a country where they're safe, right? And in a country where they can make an income, even if it pales in comparison to what their previous profession made available for them. This is the largest displacement of people ever recorded in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, one more time. Western Hemisphere, that's our half. Largest recorded displacement of people in recorded history. It is bigger than Ukraine. It is bigger than Syria. In Nicaragua, President Ortega has cracked down on opposition politicians and political dissidents and rigged his own re-election. That country has a total population of 7 million. They are losing currently over 200,000 a year. And this has been going on for over 2 years now. Most have gone to Costa Rica. But once that population overwhelmed the Costa Rica's asylum system, their president imposed new restrictions on asylum seekers, and then as a result, many have looked towards the north, including the United States. By the way, what I didn't say about Venezuela is that most went to Colombia. Colombia has absorbed the vast majority, over 3 million, of the population that have fled Venezuela. The Northern Triangle, that El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and parts of Mexico, organized crime has resulted in thousands more fleeing. To put that in perspective, from 2010 to 2020, more people immigrated, that's immigrated with an E, that means you're leaving, immigrated from the United States to Mexico than Mexicans coming to the United States. So from 2010 to 2020, we were reversing those numbers, more people going to Mexico than Mexicans coming to the United States. That reversed in recent years, again, because of widespread crime, cartels, that are involved not just in drugs, but also in human trafficking. Cuba continues under communist and authoritarian rule. People there continue to flee. We have a Cuban Adjustment Act that provides that if you make it to the United States and once you've been here for a year, you can apply for residency, kind of a fast track. That's been on the books since the 1960s. Haiti has suffered virtually every misery that one can imagine. Environmental, economic, and an unprecedented level of crime. Now, just to put that in perspective, in the midst of all this, the Biden administration has resumed deportations to Haiti. By the way, going back to the point that if you think immigration is a partisan issue, wake up. Because you can look at virtually every president and find a very mixed message. Some good, some bad, some pro-immigration, some restrictionist. I can only think of one exception that's just all bad, but we won't get into that. There's no functioning government in Haiti. So, by the way, last week, the Department of Homeland Security had to change the airport where they were deporting Haitians back to Haiti because the main airport in Port-au-Prince has been overtaken and is no longer functioning. But we're still deporting people there. And why are we doing that? Because that system, everything I talked about before, about Monyards, about Afghans, about Ukrainians, about people fleeing in Yemen, people fleeing Syria, that stuff, we do not have that infrastructure in this entire hemisphere. We do not have that infrastructure in this hemisphere. In the other hemisphere, you have refugee camps, you have UNHCR operating, and then those are screened by international organizations, and then Switzerland will take 2,000. The United Kingdom will take 10,000. America will take 20,000. That's how the refugee system works, right? Ask yourselves, when's the last time you met a refugee from El Salvador? I've never met one. I've been practicing immigration law for 27 years because it doesn't exist. I've met plenty of Salvadoran asylees, people that have gone through the asylum system and have the protection of the United States. Asylum is something that one seeks in the United States. Going back to why are they coming here and requesting asylum? Because there's no meaningful way to do it from your home country. There's no meaningful way to do it from your home country. That's just the facts. That's one of the things that the Biden administration has proposed changing, but everything with the government takes forever, is to create these centers outside of the United States so that people don't have to make the dangerous, expensive, and too often fatal journey through multiple countries and to the border, to the U.S.-Mexico border. But that has not happened fast enough, and it basically is only in its infancy right now. That's something we need to change. So the first point in resolving what's going on at the southern border is building up the infrastructure in our hemisphere. That is not an American thing. That is a Canadian thing. That's a Mexican thing. That is a South American thing. We all have to work together as a global community to make sure that we are providing some level of safety and protection, health and human services for irregular movements of people. Because, by the way, it doesn't matter who your president is. When there is an international emergency and there's mass migration, it is going to happen. It is going to happen. And so let's dig into, now that we've set the stage for what's going on and why, let's go from there. Okay, so Anne-Marie mentioned earlier Title 42. For those of you that don't know what that is a public health law that has been on the books for decades that enables the president to declare a public health crisis and use that to expel immigrants, to basically close the border, so to speak. So that was invoked during COVID by President Trump, and it was kept in effect for 14, 16 months or so by the Biden administration until ultimately, once the Biden administration declared that the COVID-19 health emergency was over, then we went back to our normal system. Now, did that solve our immigration problem? No, it didn't. So, what this did do, as this too small chart shows, is that all it did was increased exponentially the getaways. This is information from the Department of Homeland Security. Getaways are people that enter between ports of entry. So you have the doors, right? You don't go through the door, you go between the doors. You come in, that's entering without inspection. And then instead of surrendering to Border Patrol, you run. As you see, back in 2006, this is second-term Bush, into first-term Obama, you had runaways really at record highs. When we say things, when we say unprecedented, let's just make sure that we know our history, right? Because we've been here before. Second-term Bush, first-term Obama, huge numbers of runaways. Then that leveled down. And then as soon as President Trump announced Title 42, it exploded. Because people are going to run to safety. And under Title 42, there's no immigration consequence because it's not an immigration law. It's not an immigration law. You're not getting deported. You're just being told you can't come in. And so just like the Roadrunner and the Coyote, you just try again the next day. That's why you had so many repeats. Instead of unique people coming to the border, you just had people trying to do it over and over and over and over until they were able to do it. And as soon as Title 42 went away, right back down. Now, during my term as AILA president, which was just a year ago, during the height of the crisis, I was able to tour the Tucson sector of the southern border. So I got to see all this firsthand. And what CBP agents told us directly, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, is that the numbers now, you don't see runaways. Over 85% of the people that show up between ports of entry show up, put their hands up, sometimes called 911, because they're not here to evade the law. They're literally not here to evade the law. They are here to follow the law. And what does the law provide? The law provides the ability to apply for asylum, regardless of how you got into the United States, regardless of your status. And so they don't want to evade the law, they want to follow the law. So they come across the border and immediately surrender. Now, what I saw, even at the height, this is when the Tucson sector they had 2,000 encounters a day. Every 24 hours, they had to process 2,000 people. That's one sector of the United States border. That was the height. And what we saw was individuals, they created these huge, large-scale temporary housing where people were processed typically on average between 18 and within 18 and 19 hours. They surrender, they're taken to one of these centers, they are fingerprinted and interviewed, and their security checks are done. And out of that group, if they are not considered priorities, that means that they're criminals or security threats or recidivists. They've tried over and over again, unlike Title 42, because immigration law has consequences. So recidivists, criminals, security threats, they were transferred to ICE, kept in immigration detention. The rest were given papers for an ultimate immigration court date and released into the community. Now, why is that? Because, of course, that has caused a huge amount of controversy. Well, number one is just math. It's too many bodies. Why is it too many bodies? Because of all the stuff I said at the beginning that's happening at the exact same time. Again, doesn't matter which administration, it's going to happen because it has nothing to do with America. It has everything to do with the world we live in now and the fact that our hemisphere is seeing governments fall in an amount that we've never seen before. And so we've got to deal with that. And I don't mean America, Canada, Mexico, we all have to deal with that. Okay? So we have to, you can't turn someone away that is seeking asylum. They have to be given their due process. At the same time, we don't have enough, literally enough personnel or detention space to detain that many people. And so what do? You release them with conditions into the community where they have report dates. But what I need you to understand is, number one, if they, again, let me reiterate, they are not here to evade the law. They are here to follow the law. Once an asylum seeker applies for asylum, that person can get a work permit 180 days later, 6 months later. By the way, 6 months later, not as soon as you apply for asylum. You still got to figure out what you're going to do for 6 months with no benefits and no income. Well, if you've evaded, if you haven't checked, if you haven't reported, if you haven't applied for asylum, you're never going to get that work permit. You're never going to get that documentation. And so the incentive to just evade the law, that's not there. Number two, it's a different population. Anne-Marie alluded to this earlier. Can we go to the next slide? Let's see if I got it right. I did get it right. For most of my career, the undocumented population has largely been Mexican, male, and single. Mexican, male, single. And because they were going with what honestly has been our historical relationship with Mexico, and that has been one that not only where circular migration is the reality, it's also basically encouraged. You didn't have any meaningful border enforcement between the United States and Mexico until the late 1970s. It's revisionist history. There's a podcast about it, General Chapman's Last Stand. You should check it out. I think it's season 1. But it gets into that. How the point is that we didn't care. Historically, we didn't care because, again, many of these workers were here to fill in gaps in our labor force, and we needed that and wanted that. And for many of these Mexican workers, they weren't here to stay. As much as we think of ourselves, they weren't really seeking green cards or United States citizenship. They were here to work and then go home for the winter and support and be with their families, and circular. And that's how it worked for decades and decades. until the late 1970s when we decided that we wanted to enforce this border. And then we made it exponentially worse in 1996 by passing the bars that Anne-Marie talked about. So that if you are in the United States without permission and you leave, then you become barred from coming back through a legal process. So, let's apply logic here real quick. If I'm in the United States, if I've made the mistake, the civil violation of entering the United States without permission, and I'm in the country, and if I go back to do things the right way, I can't come back for a decade. Am I going to leave? No, because that makes no sense. The bar doesn't implement until you leave, and it's 10 years. If you get deported, the penalty is 10 years. So, why would I leave? Why would I leave, right? That's a failure of public policy that was made law by a Republican Congress and signed into law by a Democratic president. So again, no party has a monopoly on good and bad ideas here when it comes to immigration. That was a collaboration of poo. So historically, Mexican male single, here to work. What we have saw after America's economic collapse in 2008, you saw a huge decrease interest in anyone wanting to come to America to work because we did not have a lot of economic opportunity going on at that point in time. What we also saw concurrently was a huge increase in gang violence and then the problems in Venezuela, Nicaragua, etc. And so the demographics of who was arriving changed from Mexican male and single to people from the Northern Triangle, then people from Nicaragua, then people from Venezuela, and then a Caribbean, that's Haiti. But what we've seen lately is people arriving from all over the world. India. I've had a Nepalese man that showed up at the Mexican border. It's really, really powerful in the sense that America, regardless of how much anyone here wants to criticize America, we're still the beacon of light for the entire world. Everybody wants to come here. But at the same time, that presents a challenge because we literally can't sustain these numbers. You can't. All right, next. Now, just so everyone understands, we have seen, hopefully, that's me knocking on wood, the crescendo, the apex of the crisis. It hit about last December, and since then the numbers have been falling. So this is, again, the Tucson sector, which is the area that I was able to see firsthand. Their apprehensions have gone from about 2,000 a day to about 1,000 a day currently, which is still huge, but it's down by half. So we're moving in the right direction, but there are several factors for that, some good and some a little disturbing. Next slide. One of the main factors is because Mexican immigration enforcement is at its highest level in, again, recorded history. So the government of Mexico has really cracked down, and they are actively deporting people in numbers that we have never seen before. So that's happening. Next slide. I went out of order. I missed that. I'll get back to that. Well, actually, let me just give it a shot. Next slide. No, next one. We're going to go back. Okay, here. Okay. At the same time, President Biden announced that the government was going to create centers outside of the United States where people could seek the protection of our country. He also announced parole programs. Parole is basically like a temporary permission to enter the United States without a visa. Now, that doesn't mean unlawfully. You're entering with a travel document. It's just not technically a visa. And so it's temporary permission to be in the United States, but it's not permanent status because, of course, you couldn't do that without Congress. So this is executive action. So the Biden administration has created parole programs for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. Now, dispel a few myths real quick. Number one, this is not something where you come in the United States and are able to qualify for cell phones or public benefits or other nonsense that I've heard about. As a matter of fact, you have to demonstrate that you have a United States sponsor. And you have to buy your own plane ticket. People, that this is created as a way for people to escape these terrible situations to get to the United States on a temporary basis in a way that is orderly without them paying money to the cartels to smuggle them and without dying in the desert. What's important, I'm sorry, go back. What's important to understand is that the impact of these policies, the dark blue line, are the folks that are showing up at the southern border. And then after the implementation of the parole policies, you have seen those numbers, although there are a couple of months there that are still pretty bad, you've seen those numbers drop. Why are they dropping? Because we created a legal means of getting to the United States. Again, if you provide the means, Ukraine, Afghanistan, if you provide the means, people will use it instead of giving the money to criminal organizations and risking their lives. Because again, that's also logic. That's just logical. Okay, so I'm sorry, we got to go backwards. Yes, there. Okay, also, this does not have a huge impact on our hemisphere, but it is somewhat of a game changer, and that is the Biden administration has set the refugee admissions cap at its highest that it has been since 2016, and we're on track to actually admit a lot more refugees. That number went from almost 100,000 when Obama left office down precipitously under the Trump administration from 25,000 to 0, and now is headed back up. So again, refugee is a process that one seeks outside of the United States to gain the protection of the United States and then come in. And so the Biden administration is using that legal program to help people. But there remains challenges. Now, along my leadership journey in the American Immigration Lawyers Association, I was once the chair of the committee that is the liaison with the court system. And this was back when President Obama was president, and everyone was freaking out because the backlog was at 600,000. Freaking out. The current backlog is over 3.5 million. 3.5 million. Now, obviously the current situation at the border is the current driver of that, but I need everyone to understand that the number doubled from 600,000 to 1.5 during the Trump administration because they were not exercising any enforcement priorities. In other words, it didn't matter if you were Osama bin Laden or a grandma. If you were in the country without permission and you encountered ICE or local law enforcement, in some cases, then you were placed into removal proceedings. There was a policy during the Trump administration that said if your immigration benefits application was denied, then for whatever reason, then USCIS USCIS is the immigration benefits folks, they were directed to put that person into removal proceedings. And so you ended up with huge numbers of people that we did not have the resources to actually handle in removal proceedings, almost all of whom were eligible to fight their case because they were not criminals, they were not security threats, they had been here for over a decade, they had all of these ties. And while we weren't able to win every one of those cases, we won most of them, and it took years and years, but we were able to do it. So the point is that what happened is you just choked the immigration courts with litigation because you had all these people that really shouldn't have been there. They're the people that just need to wait for Congress to finally get off their and pass something to help them. But unfortunately, with all the different crises going on in our hemisphere, that number has gone from 1.5 million to now 3.5. It's huge. So typically I meet with a client, they do not have their first court date for years. So what we try to do is just charge some small retainer just for us to track it, just to make sure it's okay, and then because we're not really going to get down to the nitty-gritty for several years. And what happens? How does that help anyone? Because if you're here seeking the protection of the United States, you have temporary protection of the United States, but you're building roots. You're building roots in a system that says you're probably not going to win, and ultimately you're going to need to go back. To me, it's cruel. To me, it's cruel. You have somebody lingering in our system for 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, and then you tell them to go home because the gang violence that they feared in Honduras doesn't qualify for asylum, even though it's a real threat, right? But that's what's happening right now because of these backlogs and because of the system. Everyone, I promise you, everyone, including the American Immigration Lawyers Association, wants this system to move quicker and more efficiently. Because if you have a viable asylum claim, it needs to be heard and you need to be granted that benefit. But meanwhile, Congress needs to be thinking about tools like temporary protected status or expanding the numbers that Anne-Marie talked about, eliminating the bars, making it possible for people to do things the right way. By the way, going back to the first statistic about how the law was before 1920, the success rate at Ellis Island was 98%. Okay, for anyone who has great-grandparents that did it the right way, congratulations. They were able to do what also 98% of people were able to do. Because basically, the only thing that would prevent a person from immigrating in the United States at the turn of the century, between the 19th and 20th century, was if you had a crime involving moral turpitude, you were a prostitute, or you had some kind of disease of public significance. Think Godfather 2 at the beginning. Vito goes into quarantine. It's because he had smallpox. That's how the system worked back then. Otherwise, you just register and you're in. That's how the system used to work. And I'm not saying that's how the system should work in 2024. But I am saying there are common sense things that are beyond politics and beyond political parties that we as a community should all fall in behind and support to help our fellow man, especially in this hemisphere. Okay? I think I've probably gone on too long. I'm there. I'm there. All right. So I guess questions and all of this. Do I go here?